Hi everybody. Today we have an art journal tutorial where I'm going to feature 3 different stencil techniques. I'm Creative Katie, Karen Burchill. Welcome to my channel. Now let's get started. I'm working on my Canson Mixed Media art journal page. I've taken it out of the coils, and because one of the techniques that I'm going to do, I need to gesso the page first. I'm just using my white gesso and spreading it on and then giving this a good dry before I proceed with the next layers. I want to do a snow background that ties into a quote that I found, and since it's been so extremely hot, plus 42, which is 107 Fahrenheit, I just wanted to cool down and think cool thoughts. Since I'm putting snowflakes, I also want the wind to appear in the background, in amongst my layers. So I'm taking this Flourish stencil, and I'll link it and other products in the description box. And I'm using a brayer to spread a good coat of acrylic paint on it. And then I'm using a second brayer to press it down and get a good imprint. I just want this to resemble the wind. This is a great, and here I use the wrong brayer and I put black paint across the back of my stamp. So after cleaning that up, I proceed to put some swirls and wind in the background, pressing with the brayer to get a good solid print. I'm going off the page and turning the swirl as well. And I cleaned my stamp, the acrylic paint off my stamp. So now I grabbed all my blues. I don't end up using them. Any blue works. You want some light, some darks, some aquas, some teal. I even picked a green, and that would work. Now I'm using this stencil with all these snowflakes, and I'm going to apply paint to my page. Remember, this is gessoed, and I'm going to remove paint through the stencil. But I'm not going to try to put paint on the whole page. I'm putting it on a section at a time and then using a baby wipe to remove the paint. If the paint dries, you won't be able to remove it through the stencil. So I'm just doing little bits by little bits, mixing paint, using different blues, and just mixing it up. I do want to see that swirl underneath it all, and you do. I want the background to resemble a snowstorm. Using cool colors, the blues, the teals, the greens, those are all cool. And then again with the baby wipe. If you don't gesso, you will not be able to remove as much through the stencil. It won't be able to get as white. If you rub harder, you can get more paint off. I am thinning the paint a little bit in order to do this. Removing the paint through the stencil is a great technique. It kind of reverses the stencil because the parts where the stencil's cut out will be the lightest. Whereas if I was stenciling, they would be the color. Just keep turning the baby wipe. Now my goal here is to get a very layered background with these snowflakes. So number one technique using a stencil, removing paint through the stencil. Then I'm giving this a good dry before we move to the second technique with stencils, and that is to layer the stencils. I'm going to use the same stencil, and I'm going to use more blues, darks, and lights, and I'm stenciling on. And I'm being selective where I'm putting some over the edge. This is going to make it look 3D, like there is a pile of snowflakes, one on top of another. It's a good idea to turn your page so you don't forget some spots. So here I've started with Prussian blue, which is a dark navy-ish color. And then I'm going to lighten brighten by using white acrylic paint. Now you could mix paints on the makeup sponge and instead of using one color at a time. Pretty much anything goes. It's really hard to mess this up. I am using a makeup sponge. I'm not putting a whole bunch of paint on the makeup sponge. I'll go over it if I want it darker another time. Now, if you like the process that I'm going through, you could do this exact same process, use the same techniques, using whatever stencil you had. It could be a leaf stencil, it could be a flower stencil, and you would get this a similar kind of effect. Using the darks and the lights of paint with white. Here I'm going with the bright aqua. I want to introduce a little bit more green. This paint is also a little more opaque than some of the others. I'm just making layers and layers of snowflakes. So this page was inspired, well, one, from because of the heat wave, and I was thinking cool thoughts, so I thought I better do a snow page. And then I found the quote, a butterfly or a snowflake is winter's butterfly. This page would work equally as well if I did the layering stencil was butterflies, and then the focal image later is a snowflake. So now I'm using this stencil, which is Butterfly Collage, and I'm using the butterfly part, the focal image, and I'm going to call this two-step stenciling. I don't know what anybody else has called it. So the first step, I'm just stenciling the butterfly on there. But I want a solid butterfly here, so I'm painting that out. So basically I've used the outline. You could have traced the butterfly, but for this particular stencil, it was very broken. It was difficult to trace, so this was the easier way of doing it. And then I'm just painting this out with the white acrylic paint. Now I could have left it at this, but I'm going to add another step. And I was thinking of leaving it here. I wanted it solid because the background has so much going on, all those layered snowflakes. I put the sentiment in the middle so I knew where the butterflies were going to go. So step one, stencil the focal image stencil. But it kind of gets lost here a little bit, which is why I wanted it solid too. I'm just using a cutout of a butterfly here just to get the appropriate positioning. So now that those are stenciled, I am painting them in with white acrylic paint. And I use an angle brush to do this. I just find using an angle brush is just easier to control and to get the paint where you want it. And I want it to go for a pretty opaque solid covering. Then I'm taking that same stencil. Here's the second step. Same stencil. I put it back on, line it up, and I'm stenciling with gold. I debated between gold or putting a blue, but I thought, I'm going to introduce a complementary color to the blues and greens, cross from the color wheel, so it stands out as opposed to using more blue. There's so much blue in the background already. So lining it up, gold paint. Now gold is fairly translucent, so I go slowly, and I've added a couple times here to get the level of gold that I wanted. Now, if this was a canvas, and I love this quote, and I can see myself doing this as a canvas, I would do this step with gold modeling paste to add texture. But I absolutely love the shimmer and the gold being a complementary color to the blues and greens. Just trimming off a little excess white. And when I'm happy with everything, I'm going to grab my fluid matte medium and glue it down. Just lift it up when I have the perfect placement, put some matte medium underneath, and then go from the other side. If you're interested in purchasing any sentiment packs, I will put a link to NinnysNapkins where you can go and look at all the ones that I have available. So after making sure that's all dry, I wanted those butterflies to stand out a little bit more. So I grabbed my angle brush and I'm using the floating acrylic technique with Prussian blue right here to shade, to give it some shadows. Now the Prussian blue wasn't quite as dark as I wanted it to be. So right about here, I start using black. And yes, I'm loving that. The black is just really making that butterfly step up from the background. I do have a tutorial where I show the floating acrylic technique and teach it, show up close, step by step. It's a great technique for shading and highlighting. So go and check it out. Do it in the search bar when you're in my channel. Type in floating acrylic. And you can see, between the one half of the butterfly where it hasn't happened yet and the other half, what a difference it makes. And then I use the floating acrylic technique to shade or edge the page as well. And that frames the page. And again, you have the shading around the butterflies, you have the shading around the page, you have the black of the font of the sentiment. So everything works together. giving that a quick dry. I had some gold paint on my palette, so I added a little water, and I'm just splattering with gold across the whole page. Now I'm removing the tape to keep that I put to keep the gunk from the coils. When the paper lifts, if you heat it with the heat tool, the glue lets go and you don't rip the paper. Using my Posca pen to outline the sentiment and to darken the sentiment here. Little finishing details. I just wanted the black to be true, rich, dark black. Be careful not to put your hand in wet paint or wet Posca pen. That's why I turned this here. As I continue to just darken the lettering. So this brings us to the end of this video. I hope you love this page. I hope you give it a try using the same materials I have or what you have in your stash. Until next time, go get creative.